I have with me today Jeff Williams, Director of Product Management, who is both a product manager and an advocate for accessibility. Welcome, Jeff, and thank you for joining me. First of all, let me open up with a big question. What is the goal for document accessibility?
Thank you so much for having me here today, Muhi. The goal for document accessibility is to provide an equal access to and an equivalent experience for all users to consume digital content, regardless of their physical or cognitive disabilities. Most of us are aware with website accessibility and being able to access websites for everybody, but little is known about the actual content in document form that's on a website that also has to be made accessible.
Great, thank you, Jeff. What does it take to make a document accessible?
Well, to make a document accessible, you essentially need to provide a structure to that document in the form of tags. Specifically, you need to identify all the content in the document and what type of content it is. For example, you need to identify images. What are they trying to convey? What text might be on that image? You also have to convey headings so that you can navigate the document without the use of a mouse, and provide table structures so that you can easily understand what information is being presented to the user.
And Jeff, once a document is made accessible, how can it be read?
That's a very common question that we hear, and specifically people ask us, how does a visually impaired or blind person actually read a document? Well, there's a few ways, but the most common way is using a form of assistive technology called a screen reader. Essentially, a screen reader will read the content of a website, application, or a document out loud to the user. It allows them to navigate through that document using keyboard shortcuts and eliminate the need for a mouse. The other way is through something called a refreshable Braille display, which is like a Braille keyboard.
Thank you, Jeff. Given the goals of accessibility and the number of people that it can positively impact, why isn't everybody doing that?
That's another good question. Most organizations, in order to know which users require alternate or an accessible format, they require their users to self-identify, to make it known that they have a disability and require something different. Now, organizations will typically retain and leverage third-party firms called service providers to take this content and make it into an accessible format for their end users and possibly deliver it to them. But that option can be very expensive, sometimes costing $5 a page, $10, up to $50 or more per page, depending on the complexity. So it can be very costly for an organization to implement one of these standard ways to provide accessibility. And if they chose to do it in-house, they just don't have the expertise or the tools available to them.
Thank you, Jeff. So if I understood correctly, it's very expensive, it's time consuming, and can also be error prone. Knowing all of these three things, are we really going to see organizations embrace accessibility?
Well, I think we're starting to see an increased awareness around providing that equal experience to all users, regardless of disability. Specifically within this COVID-19 pandemic, everyone's been forced to rely on a corporation's online presence even more. For those persons living with disabilities who may have relied on going into a branch, dealing face-to-face with an individual to handle their personal business, an accessible digital experience can be very frustrating if it's not accessible. And these individuals are being very vocal about their experiences, and organizations are listening to them And this is all outside of any of the legislative requirements for them to make their content accessible. What I'd like to do, Muhi, is show you our document accessibility and machine learning in action. I'm going to leverage a document that you prepared for me, an open text press release. So we upload that into document accessibility. We open the document, and here's how we're going to use the machine learning to automatically tag it. I'm going to select a model that I've already created with other open text press releases that have been tagged. Now the machine is going through and tagging, looking at all the content within the document and predicting what tags should be there. So here we have the press release. First thing I want to do is check it for accessibility. And we see that there's an error here somewhere. Oh, I see it's on this figure. It's missing its alternate text. So let's open that up. Now I could easily type in open text logo here, but since this is a press release that we've seen many times before, we've already captured that alternate text in our alternate text manager. So we just go and pull that from the system and apply it. So we see here that there's no other issues in the document. We've already found, and the machine learning has already tagged the document correctly. But just to be sure, we're going to go into the accessibility report, and we see here that there's one failed condition. So we need to get that fixed. It says there's no title. So we're going to click fix, and we see that indeed a title is missing. So we're going to write open text press release here for the title and click OK. And now we have no issues in the document. I'm going to go ahead and download the accessible version of this document. And here it is in Adobe Acrobat. We can make sure that the tags have already been added, and we do have the tags here. If I hover over the logo, you'll see that the alternate text has been applied. And now this press release is good to be added to the website so that persons of all abilities can read and enjoy this press release. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. The demo looked really easy, and thanks to machine learning and the innovations that we have done. But is it really that easy, and how do you train the system?
Thank you, Muhi. Well, to be honest, training the system is actually even easier than tagging the document. To train the system, you just need to have a set of documents that have been correctly tagged for accessibility. You upload them into the training area of the interface. You drag them into the model you'd like to train with them and click on Start Training. Once the system has learned from all of the correct tags in that corpus of documents, they're ready to be used in tagging new documents. We also have the option for a user to submit a document that they just finished tagging if they're happy with it, and use that as a sample to train further models.
Jeff, thank you so much. These are great information you're sharing with us. I have one more question. Are there standards or legislation that will force organizations to do the right thing?
Another good question, Muhi. There are several standards and pieces of legislation that are aimed to push organizations to do the right thing. If we look at the US, there's the Section 508 of the US Rehabilitation Act, which applies to US federal agencies and the businesses and corporations that do business with them. There's the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which applies to employment, state and local government, and private corporations. And then here in Ontario, Canada, we have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And there's similar pieces of legislation across the globe. Now, most of the legislation refers to something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. and that's the standard for making accessible content and applications, whether it be a website or an application. Now, we specifically look at for PDFs, and for PDFs, it's the PDF UA, which is PDF for Universal Accessibility, and that is an ISO standard which ensures that the PDF format itself is not the barrier to a document being accessible.